Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this live stream. Today we're going to be talking about what happens in universities in Pakistan. And I'm with Arsalan Tariq. How are you doing, Arsalan?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm all good, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Um, I went to Pakistan um, a few years ago to do a whole bunch of talks at different universities, and all the way from Islamabad to Karachi, Lahore, and just traveling around. There's certain patterns I saw, and because you're studying at university now, I thought, you know what, I'll ask you about my perception of what's going on, and then get your thoughts on it. So, firstly, where do you currently study at the moment?
I'm studying at NUST.
NUST,
My major is electrical engineering.
electrical engineering. Okay, good. So NUST is like it's a official university of the government, right?
Uh, it's a semi-government, you can say. Um, it's an engineering university predominantly.
Okay, okay, good. Um, so I think one of the things that I noticed is that in Pakistani universities, there is a rise of Marxism, right? There seems to be a rise of left wing ideologies like Marxism, um, and people are following, say, the icons of the old Soviet Republic, right? And those sort of ideologies. And that's mixed in with liberalism, and it's mixed in with a whole bunch of postmodern ideas. But it seems like those people, they don't actually understand the basis of the ideology. They're following it out of fashion. I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's not only communism. It's multiple other philosophies as well. You can have nihilism involved as well, secularism as well. But most of the people that are involved in these things, they're not doing it on the base of any sort of solid conclusion, or they came up with a particular deduction. Is simply because of social conformity. They're just
Yes.
following some individual, and in order to look cool, they'll come up with a herd, and that herd will follow that individual, and they'll look cool, and everyone will say that that group is the cool group, and everyone wants to join that cool group. But they
Mhm.
don't have any basis, so they don't even know themselves why are they doing what they're doing. Who are they following, and why are they following who are they following? So
Mm,
it is true that you'll find such groups in Pakistan.
yeah. And I think one of the things about these groups is that they're looking up to certain intellectuals in the country.
Hmm.
So Pervez Hoodboy, the other professor from Lums, what's his name?
Dr.
Uh,
Taimur Rahman.
yeah, that guy. Um, and just a few people. And these people are supposed to be their intellectual fathers, if you like, ideological fathers. Um, so, firstly, just on that, uh, if you map out the landscape, who are the main figures, would you say? So, I pointed out two. Is there any more?
Um, Mainly, these are the tools, but you'll find people like Sayyid Muzammil,
Yes.
and that's a very predominant figure in Pakistan as well. That's followed by the leftist. You'll find people like Shahzad Ghayas on the Pakistan experience. So these are a few. Temur Salauddin Muru is also on
Yes.
that side of the spectrum as well. So most of the people that won't follow Pervez Hoodbhoy because they might find him a bit too intellectual for them. So they'll find themselves following Shahzad Ghayas and Muru, since they can relate to them. They're almost their age, and they talk in a particular manner that it's quite attractive, and they talk in a manner that a particular teenager talks in. It's somewhat you could say that they can relate to. So
Yeah.
these are the main figures.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, so we have these podcasters, these popular podcasters, and we have these liberal figureheads. But also, I noticed when I went to universities, they were particular professors who publicly were not outspoken liberals, but privately to the students, they were spreading these ideologies. And they seem to be quite anti Islam, a lot of these.
Yes, you'll find that in certain universities, but you won't find that in a lot of disciplines. For example, I'm studying engineering, and we study a lot of technical courses. You know, something along the line of calculus or maths and programming. So you won't find people that are indoctrinating us in these types of pure engineering fields. But in the
Yeah.
fields of humanities, in medicine, in humanities, uh, you have certain figures like this. And I'd say psychology is one of the most predominantly widespread discipline in which this type of thing is happening, in which you'll have certain professors pushing certain ideologies. Despite the fact that's another debate that, you know, why are we studying such a curriculum, but they're actively pushing what's inside of the curriculum, and you know, in favor of what they're teaching. So you know, something along the line of Sigmund Freud and you know whatnot.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of that going on. Also, there's a lot of history which is taught as part of the general Pakistani curriculum, which is there to prime people towards secular ideas
Hmm.
and philosophy. So, for example, Ataturk, right? Ataturk is taught in a very different way in Pakistan to
Yeah.
how he is in reality. I mean, you've been through the schooling system there. So, what was your introduction to Ataturk?
So if I'm not wrong, I studied around second year, which is equivalent to A levels, around 5.5, 6 years ago. So as far as I remember, like you know, at the time of Ataturk, the last Ottoman Empire was Mehmed, and Mehmed was shown to be a very weak and very cowardly Ottoman Empire. The guy who was running and all of that stuff was happening, and Ataturk was shown to be he was shown to be a very a brave and a courageous leader that took Turkey out of the shackles of that slavery and all of that stuff. But in reality, that's not true. And it's not only with Turkey, and it's not only with that his part of history. In fact, even in modern day Pakistan at the moment, people are questioning. You know, Islam spread through Muhammad bin Qasim in 712 here in the subcontinent, and people are questioning why did Muhammad bin Qasim came all the way from where he came from to here and spread Islam here. Why did he do that? Because they're claiming that Muhammad bin Qasim came for loot and he just wanted to kill everyone, but that's not true. We know in history that Hajjaj bin Yusuf sent his expedition Muhammad bin Qasim here to Sindh because Raja Dahar, who was the alleged king at that time, he was conspiring with the pirates in the Arabian Peninsula, and those pirates were looting the Muslims when they were going across that path. And
Yeah.
Hajjaj bin Yusuf sent multiple letters to Raja Dahir saying that stop this. And despite multiple attempts, he didn't do that. And after that, he sent Muhammad bin Qasim. And Muhammad bin Qasim didn't further expand it. He stopped at Sindh and he just came back. And
Mm,
even he is being portrayed as some sort of villain that came in and started looting Sindh and killed a lot of Hindus and stuff like that. So that
yeah.
is history is being trying to they are trying to taint history.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also noticed amongst the liberals, there seems to be this love of India and this picture of India as, that's our culture. We're not really Muslim. We're really Hindu, right? There's a lot of that sort of Hindu nostalgia that these liberals are trying to, generate.
Yes. So we know for a fact that Pakistan was liberated. It was given independence on the basis of the two nation theory that Muslims and non-Muslims are not the same. Muslims and Hindus are not the same. Muslims and non-Muslims are not the same. And there are
Yeah.
two different people. There are two different nations. There are two different ideologies, and they cannot live together. And on the basis of that, we formed Pakistan. And 75 years later, you have the people on the left questioning whether that was actually the reason Pakistan was formed. And they're trying to taint history, and they're trying to mend the words of Qaid Azam and certain leaders and saying that No, in fact, that Pakistan wasn't based on the form of on Islamic ideology. It was based upon secularism. So one would argue, then why bother having a separate state if it was based upon secularism? Why not just join India? So that is true that they are trying to taint this image, and they paint this image that we're actually Indians and that's our origin, and this isn't what we're supposed to be.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And also, when it comes to, say, the Muslim identity, there is a concerted effort to try and weaken this, right? To try and weaken that and to liberalize that. So one of the
Hmm.
ways is by saying, "Oh, we're not that different to India, right? We're basically the same people." But also, there's a concerted effort to undermine the Islamic identity as a general guide for the Muslims, right? So one of the things which I found strange is people like Hoodboy, they would say, well, when it comes to someone like Jinnah, he didn't write any peer-reviewed paper, right? Where's his, academically basically trying to challenge him and then basically saying he didn't know what he was doing, right? The whole thing was incoherent. Now, what I found strange about that is, what is the logical consequence of that kind of thinking? You're basically trying to say that the entire Islamic nation identity is false. We shouldn't be having this. We are basically the same as India, right? So what indirectly he wants to do is challenge wala wal bara. He wants to challenge love and hate for the sake of Allah. He wants to challenge the very basis of there being a distinction between us and the people who today are carrying out massacres in India. We've seen what's been happening with the Muslims. So what I find strange is that these things are being espoused openly, and these people are given major platforms, yet you can't have an Islamic society, an Islamic group, Islamic wing, or any sort of committee at the universities. It all has to be secular. I found that really
Yes,
strange.
yeah,
So
yes, yes, yes.
in a country which is called the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, you can't actually have an Islamic society at universities.
Yes, you'll have something along the line of character building society, or something along the line of its division is like self help, and it's not
Yeah,
religious. So
yeah,
under self help, you'll have character development society or something like that, but you can never name it Islamic society. There
yeah.
might be a few universities, not prominent ones, that will be open and say this is our Islamic society. And as far as Dr. Pervez Hudba is concerned, like, I'd simply say that he's a physicist, and he's an amazing physicist. I'll say that, but he shouldn't be talking about politics. That's not his field. That's the best I can say about him.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when it comes to, say, speaking about a figure like Jinnah,
Hmm.
you have to understand this person in their context. He was a leader trying to protect the Muslims from, basically Indian, the Hindu sort of what he saw as threat. Now, other people may have disagreed with him. Some Islamic scholars disagreed with him. That's fine. We can have that intellectual discussion. But to simply write someone off in a very crass way by saying they have no peer-reviewed, article. Well, we could say the same about Malcolm X. Like, it's such a ridiculous way of articulating yourself. And what I find strange as well is that he wants to not only challenge the very Islamic identity as it is in the country today, he wants to challenge Islam writ large. So, one of the things that he does is he tries to show that any true Islamic society is going to be anti philosophical, anti rational, and anti science. That's his narrative. And it's
Hmm.
very, very popular in the country. His
It's
book, I'm sure you're aware of, I've forgotten the title, his 1980s book about rationality and religion, something to do with orthodoxy, is filled with entire strawmen of the Islamic narrative. Yet he is writing in the mainstream newspapers, he's on mainstream TV attacking Islam. And you would think, how is this possible, right? How is something like this possible?
Yeah, that is quite true. If I remember correctly, um, uh, I think I forgot the point. But like I said previously, the first thing is that he is a physicist and he shouldn't talk about something that it's out of his field. And
Yeah,
that's not a very good and solid argument that since Jinnah didn't have any solid peer reviewed papers, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
yeah,
He had his own struggles, and we are here primarily because of the struggles he went through. And he did go through the phase that we should try to be part of the Indian subcontinent and we should work with the Hindus. And after a long decade of two, he realized that that isn't the case. That he realized the fact that uh, Muslims and Hindus are they can't live together. They are a separate nation. And simply just throwing all of his work down the river and saying that he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's quite wrong, at
yeah,
the very least,
yeah.
I'd say.
And going to like what I was saying earlier about his general attack on Islam, Imam Ghazali is considered one of the greatest Islamic scholars in history, right? And if you look at what he says, uh, somebody like Ghazali has a huge amount of information available on them. It would just take you a few clicks online to find dozens of books that you could get, understand his ideas. Yet, what he does is he tries to say that Ghazali is the reason why Muslims fell behind in science, right? And I researched this topic a few years ago. And one of the things I found strange is that it would only take you surface level research to realize that the golden era of Islam in terms of scientific discoveries was after Ghazali. In fact, centuries after him. So, this narrative that they call the classic narrative, right, which Ghazali brought down science, is not true. Yet, this man has the audacity to go around universities and come on TV and just lambaste Islam the entire time. And he will also push people towards scientism, and he would constantly push that as a rational perspective. So I feel there needs to be a level of pushback from an intellectual level in Pakistan. Do you think that that's happening, that people are now standing up to these type of liberal ideologies at universities and these popular podcasts and actually refuting them on their own terms?
For Over the past couple of years, I have seen quite a lot of people that are more inclined towards gaining Islamic knowledge, and when they actually have both the Islamic knowledge as well as secular knowledge, then they realize they're strawmen, and they try to refute them, and they don't shy away from them. And previously, like Hood by himself mentioned that Islam and science can't go hand to hand. But if that is true, then how would we ever have Ibn Sina? How would we have Al Khwarizmi? How would we have Al Ghazali? And all of the Muslim prominent figures that we actually had. And as an engineer myself, I'm studying these people. These were Muslim polymaths.
Yeah,
These were philosophers and these were mathematicians. They were people of medicine, and just simply just saying that Islam and philosophy and science can go hand to hand, it's a very big and huge straw man, and it's a very bogus claim,
yeah,
nevertheless.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, you know, Islam allows naturalistic explanations as part of its understanding of the world. We don't deny natural causes. We believe behind every disease there's a cure. We behind every effect there's a cause. We believe in rational inquiry. We believe in all these things. Yet he wants to paint these types of pictures. Um, so we have obviously this liberal side, and now on the other side, we're starting to see Muslim, some podcasters, some intellectuals standing up and actually challenging these ideas. So, can you name a few figures that you've come across yourself that have been doing this over the past couple of years in Pakistan?
So uh, one of the most prominent ones is Raja Ziaul Haq, obviously from Youth Club. He actively does this. That he's been
Yeah,
doing this from as long as I remember, 2011. But
Yeah.
on social media, if I'm not wrong, he's been doing this for around a couple of years, like around 5 6 years. He's been actively doing this. Apart from this, you'll have Muhammad Kaisar Ahmed Raja. Like Kaisar Ahmed Raja
Yes.
is also working a lot on this. So these are mainly the prominent two figures, I'd say, that are very academically sound. They have very sound arguments, and they actually know what they're talking about. Uh,
Mm.
so they have a lot of research, and even in youth club itself, you'll have a lot of people like Muhammad Ahmed. He's a graduate of international law.
Ahmed Khan.
Ahmed Khan, yes. So he's also a very academically sound person in refuting such claims as well. These are one of the prominent figures I'm well aware of, and I actively listen to as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So these people are obviously standing up now, and they're trying to um, argue against these types of ideologies. Do you think the universities are a fair playing field for the liberals versus, if you like, the religious speakers? Because I didn't feel that. I didn't. I felt there was active discrimination in Pakistani universities against essentially Islamic speakers. One of my own talks was cancelled, and I've never been cancelled in the UK. I've never been cancelled in Canada, in America, in Australia. I've never. I was cancelled in a Islamic Republic of Pakistan for giving a
Uh,
talk, and it's actually a talk on Islam and science.
yes, there are certain topics. Uh, it's not only because of certain liberal factors. Mainly after the 9/11, you say after the terrorist attacks, most predominantly. So they had to cut down on such topics for many reasons, and predominantly, I'd say there's a disparity on what kind of universities you're talking about. But there are certain universities that won't allow such talks, and on the other hand, you'll have certain universities that have no problem with these talks as well. But within those universities as well, you'll find a disparity between the administration and the student body as well. So in certain universities, you'll find that you'll have the student body that is entirely cooperating, and they want to arrange certain talks, but the university administration is not allowing it. And on the other hand, you'll also have certain universities in which the university administration, or at least some people in the university administration, are looking forward to having certain talks, but
Yeah.
most of the students there, they don't want to have it. So it's a spectrum. Like it varies from university to university, but there are certain universities that have certain tendencies of doing what you're saying,
Mm.
have done.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good sort of summary. Um, Also, when it comes to, say, because the way I'd look at Pakistan is the same way as Bangladesh or Egypt. In the Muslim world, it's a similar pattern of secularization and liberalization and modernization. It's the same thing. So you have the thing at the universities, you have the thing in the media, right? Um, One thing that you progressively see on Pakistani television is the input of very clear liberal ideas and values being meshed into the dramas so that people actually quietly and silently and softly accept those ideas. And
Yes.
over time, you don't even see it. You don't even see it, but it all begins. And one of the things that's very prominent is feminism, right? Um, Incredible amount of feminism is being pushed through TV stations and radio and the mainstream sort of outlets.
uh, you're talking about subliminal messaging, and it's not only limited to feminism, it's even gone up to LGBTQ as well. So in Pakistan, about a year or two ago, there was a film called Joyland that was coming about, and it was pretty much a movie about a man falling in love with another man, but was a transgender, but he was actually a biological man. So what they were actually portraying the love between two men, and in Pakistan they were trying a lot to push it and they wanted to have a nomination for Oscar as well. So I believe it didn't want an Oscar because it wasn't eligible for certain reasons. But eventually, what happened was in certain dramas, they started putting posters of that particular film inside of that drama, even though it wasn't related. You'll have a certain drama and you'll have a particular scene which isn't related to anything, but you'll have in that particular scene the poster of that film, Joyland. And in similar scenarios, uh, there was something called identity crisis. Now they've incorporated gender crisis as well. So you'll have prominent actors playing certain roles in which they're telling their kids, they're telling their own children that it's okay. You can decide if you want to be a boy or a girl later on in life. We won't judge you. So these are all the messaging that's being done to us, and it's
Hmm.
been done for quite some time. Feminism is just at the tip. It's
Yeah,
something very deep that's happening.
yeah. It's interesting. You're speaking about how it, it's sometimes not even indirect. It's
Hmm.
quite direct. Um, I'm thinking back to a few years ago when I was asked to give a talk at one of the universities in Lahore, and what happened is I wanted to give a talk on the unholy trinity, right? Which was atheism, feminism, and Darwinism. And the point of the talk was that Darwinists are usually atheists, and atheism, as a general new atheism, is linked to movements like feminism. I wanted to show two clear problems. The first problem was a sociological problem. And that was the problem between new atheism and feminism, because the feminists felt the new atheists were all men, and it's a very masculine movement, and it's very, you know, misogynistic and all that, right? All of that stuff. Secondly, apart from the sociological issue, there was a conceptual philosophical problem because Darwinism undermines feminism. Darwinism, shows us that patriarchy and gender roles and these types of things like toxic masculinity, all of these have significant adaptive advantages. So they've been selected for, right? And there's plenty of literature, there's a lot of literature on this. So I was basically trying to show you can't really, you want to be a liberal, so you want to be a feminist, but you also want to be a Darwinist at the same time. But these two clash. If you're a Darwinist, you have to accept the conclusions of evolutionary psychology, and evolutionary psychology undermines feminism. And here's all the literature. Arsalan, all they were doing was the room was just filled with all women, and I think one or two men. They were just constantly attacking me, but they didn't know what I was trying to say. they just they couldn't. It's like they were trying to attack me, but they were so incoherent. I couldn't make sense of what they were saying. And then what happened at one point, which is really cringe. It's like cringe level 100, right? What I like to do is when someone asks me a question, I repeat the question so they understand that I've acknowledged the question, I've registered the question, and I'm going to re-explain the answer or whatever, right? When I tried to do that, the woman interrupted me and said, "You're mansplaining me." And I thought, you're just using that term because you just wanted to use that bloody term. You don't really understand. I'm not mansplaining you. I'm literally repeating your question, right? And I just thought, you know what? This is too cringe. This is too cringe. These people don't know what the hell they're talking about. They're not feminists, right? They're not feminists. They certainly aren't, you know, liberals. Like they just don't understand what they are. Like pick your camp. You're an atheist, Darwinian, or you're a feminist liberal. You can't mesh the two. But Arsalan, I have not met such an incoherent bunch of university students in my life, apart from those Pakistani feminist women. Like, honestly, it was so bad. It was so bad. I don't know if what your experience has been with, looking at these feminists in Pakistan, but they see feminists are the worst of the bunch.
Yeah. I remember something Virginia Woolf wrote is that after the first wave, the word feminism has become morally corrupt. It doesn't make sense. So it originally was for the suffrage movement, giving women the right to vote and equal representation in a political system. But now it's all messed up, to be honest. Uh, Now they don't even know what they're trying to fight for, um, and it's not that coherent as well. So they don't even have that cohesion as well. So within
Yeah,
feminism, you'll have separate sectionist groups. You'll have radical feminists. You'll have liberal feminists. You'll have Marxist feminists. So,
yeah.
and they don't agree with one another as well.
Hmm.
So, and then you'll have the Desi feminists that are totally different breed as well.
No, they're totally incoherent. Um, and the funny thing is, when it comes to, I mean, what I would call Pakistani Marxism, right? I would call it a type of house Marxism, a timid Marxism, because they're calling people, oh, we want liberation for women and we want this and we want that and freedom of religion and all of this. Yet, right next door, Afghanistan is an example of what Marxism actually does to an Islamic society. When the Marxists came in, what did they do? They did everything possible to destroy Islam in the country. That's what the Marxists did in Central Asia. If you look at Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Albania, you look at all of this strip, all of these areas, these heavily Muslim dominated areas, and what the Marxists did, any Muslim with two brain cells would realize Marxism is a cancer. It's an absolute cancer. It's not going to stop until it destroys religion because that's the enemy. That's the boogeyman. That's the villain in the story. And the Marxists in Pakistan, they think they can speak about Marxism and detach it from all this history and just blame that on the, whatever. They just didn't understand it or they're commies or whatever it is. Not willing to accept history, which is just a few decades old.
Yeah, that is quite true. Uh, like, if I remember correctly, I don't know if it's a bit related to this topic that when the Soviets were in power, so they were trying to push atheism, and they based their beliefs, mainly scientific, on Einstein's model. So Einstein believed that time was absolute; it was never ending, and during that time, it was the time of Bertrand Russell. He was a predominant believer of that as well, because the Big Bang wasn't postulated at that time. And since time was absolute, it didn't have any sort of a singularity, didn't happen, and there was no beginning or end. So post Big Bang, everything shifted. Now they knew there was a beginning, and that shifted their whole narrative, and especially the USSR. So after the 90s, right after 90, 92, 93, so religion started to come back in USSR. So despite their efforts, the Marxists' efforts, they reverted back to Orthodox Christianity, and
Mm,
it's one of the most prominent. Like Russia is pretty much more dominantly Orthodox Christians right now.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting you say that because I mean, there's two things you've said. One is the rise of religion after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that's a really interesting area. But also the Soviet repression of the Big Bang model. A lot of
Hmm.
people don't know this. Oh, Muslims hold back science. No, they don't. Atheists hold back science, and the prime example is the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, the physicists did not like the Big Bang model because they thought it gave air to theism. And Big Bang as a model was accepted eventually in the communist territories because they were forced to. They eventually had to give in to the scientific evidence. When it comes to the West, because they didn't have that anti religious sentiment as much as the communists did, the Big Bang was accepted decades earlier. And
Hmm.
this is actually interesting because I remember listening to William Lane Craig had this course where he was going over the Kalam cosmological argument. Everything begins to exist as a cause. The universe began to exist. So the universe has a cause. The universe began to exist. Premise number two. He uses philosophical and scientific evidence for it. So in the scientific evidence, which obviously is probabilistic, he goes over the evidence for it, but also he went over some of the history. And that's, I think that he did his PhD in that, so he really understands the history of Big Bang cosmology and where it was adopted and where it wasn't, and he relates these types of things of how difficult it was for them, philosophically, to accept this. um I don't recommend anyone watches Netflix, but there's a show on Netflix called Three Body Problem, and the opening scene is a scientist who, and they're all atheists, right? Obviously, they're communists. A scientist who's open to Big Bang cosmology, and he rejects, obviously, the universe being eternal, and he's killed. That's in the opening scene, right? I'm not recommending people go see that, but what does it show you? It goes to show you these people repress religion as well. It's not just,
Hmm.
they're trying to say it's the religious folk. But the second thing that you said, Arsalan, which I find really interesting, is the rise of religion after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, here in London, there are a lot of former communist state countrymen, people who are under communism. So Polish, Romanians, Ukrainians, a lot of Ukrainians came in because of the war, and they are believers in Christianity. Russians as well, right? Take that boxer Usyk, right? Like, he is a hardcore Christian, and you'll find the strongest Christians in Europe are not in Western Europe. They're from
Hmm.
Eastern Europe,
In
where they
Europe.
had communism for decades. And I'll tell you something interesting. And this just goes back to human nature, right? Um, I was in Speaker's Corner a few years ago, and there was a Ukrainian girl, woman, and she I was talking to her about God, and she said something really interesting. She said she was brought up with the old Soviet curriculum, right? There is no God, and evolution and scientism and all of that stuff that they used, because remember, they imposed state atheism. And she said that she was brought up as an atheist, but later on in life she went through trouble and then turned to God. So they can't repress human nature. Human
Hmm.
nature is fixed, right? Human nature is there and is fixed, and it's very hard for them to undo. And I think, Arsalan, this is what's one of the most powerful arguments against the leftists, Marxists, and these types of people in Muslim lands, is you point out to them, what did you do when you have power? When the Christian missionaries say, oh, Muslims are peaceful during the Medinan period, but violent, no, during the Meccan period, but are violent during the Medinan period, right? Obviously, that's false, but
Hmm.
they have their own Medinan period, don't they? When they
The
when they have
Crusaders.
power, they kill. When they're in the Meccan period, they don't have power, like in Pakistan. And this is why I sent you that I WhatsApp that Taimur Rahman guy. He was saying something to me, and then I was replying to him on Twitter. Like, I'm sorry, he's sounds like a very nice guy, but Marxism has the red color, and it should, because of the bloodshed. They don't talk about that. They avoid talking about it like the plague. They don't want to deal with the history.
Yeah, that is true. So they're trying to push things, to pick and choose. So they want to propagate what they like to propagate, but the key aspects of Marxism, or what other secularism being, and how many people died because of secularism and Marxism, they don't want to talk about that. They just want to push those philosophies for their own personal agendas, for whatsoever their objectives might be, and they just want to push it. And
Yeah,
it is what it is, you could say.
yeah, yeah.
But
So
nevertheless, there is still a pushback, uh, which wasn't there a couple of years ago. So,
yeah,
as a Pakistani, as a Muslim, and as someone from Pakistan and in Islamabad right now, I'm observing that the amount of youth that was in masjid, and that's steadily increasing, and people don't shy away talking about their religion, their beliefs, like they used to. It was pretty much a taboo topic or something along the line. They just simply didn't talk about it. Now they're willing to share about it. They're willing to talk about it. They're willing to learn. They're willing to improve themselves, which wasn't the case a couple of years ago. So
Hmm.
things are going in the right directions, I'd
Yeah,
say.
I think you're right. I think you're right about that. Um, I think what's happening is there's a generational gap. So, my generation, which is obviously I'm a different generation to you, there's a big age gap. Um, it was very different to your generation,
Hmm.
very, very different. And the same in the UK. The generation like my sister's at university now, and I was at university a long time ago, is far more religious now than it was 20
Hmm.
years ago. And the same you'll find all across the Muslim world. You'll find it in Egypt, Algeria, Sudan. You'll find it in the entire Muslim world. I think one of the reasons for this is the rise of social media. Because
Hmm.
before, if you're sitting in Islamabad, you would never be able to interact with, say, a liberal feminist in Canada. But due to the internet, the whole world's coming together as one. Like technically, I could be in Islamabad right now, or Tokyo, or London. It makes no difference. Everyone's talking to each other on the internet, right? So I think what that did is it allowed Muslims to reconnect with other Muslims. It allowed Muslims to find out about other ideologies and find out about the flaws of the other ideologies. Because in the past, oh, look at the West, is so successful. But I think through the internet, people saw, well, is it really that successful? People are converting to Islam. Why is that? People aren't having kids, they're having dogs instead. Something must be wrong there. You know, people cannot stop their daughters, their wives, their mothers in some cases from going on OnlyFans, right? It's a complete mess. It's a complete and utter mess. And this is why people are turning away from all of this stuff. I mean, even things like Andrew Tate's conversion to Islam. Now, whatever people say about him and he said some things, whatever it is, I'm leaving that aside purely from a sociological perspective. I have seen people accept Islam because he became Muslim. Because sometimes people do that. Is a popular person become Muslim? Okay, they're going to become Muslim. Obviously,
Hmm.
that's not the best reason.
Yeah.
But still, there is something in the air. There is a power in the air. And I feel that, you know, the, all across the world, the Muslim youth is far, far stronger than it was when I was young.
I'd say in all of this, COVID was a very good catalyst, and
What was?
people, COVID 19, it was a very
Right.
good catalyst. So,
Okay.
social media was there for, it has been there for around 10 years and even longer. But when people were isolated in their homes and they had nothing else to do, and they were seeing a lot of deaths around them, it started to make them question reality. It started to make them question about actually what the purpose of life is. Because what else matters if you don't even know if you're going to live. So you're just staying at home simply because the fact that you're fearing the fact that if you go out, you might catch COVID and you might die. And that existential question led them closer to finding their purpose. And I'd say that served as a very strong catalyst in people coming back to Islam, people coming back to their roots. Uh, uh, Andrew Tate and all of those people, they were also a byproduct of this environment as well, I'd say. And
Hmm.
as far as that OnlyFans is concerned, like, people in the West are sick and tired of this stuff. And have you heard of this term, passport bros? Have you heard?
Yeah, yeah, this is
Yeah.
very common.
So this is very common.
Very
So what they do is like they ship from America and they go to some Middle East country or this or an Eastern
Philippines.
European country,
Philippines.
Philippines, Eastern European countries, even maybe Muslim countries, and they marry and settle there. And the Western women, the American women, are really pissed about it. They're really pissed. Like most men are just going away, uh, and they're like they can't do anything about it,
Yeah.
and it's quite on the rise as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost, and it's not the case. It's done only for religious reasons. The problem is when you take away religion or you liberalize religion, you end up with a society that's degenerate.
Hmm.
That's degenerate. Now, degenerate society, if you happen to be a horny 15-year-old, it looks nice. But when you're a 25-year-old that's looking to get married and all you see around you is degenerates, right? And you're degenerate yourself as well. There's no hope. You don't think about children because you're like, you've been through the schooling system. You know what it's like. You know what a sewage it is, right? So what do people do? They think, okay, this utopia must exist somewhere, and they go to Pakistan, Bangladesh, Philippines, Mexico. Sometimes people go Latin America, and they're looking for that. But the problem is that liberalism as an ideology, it's being fed to the entire world. So even these areas which are supposedly safe, they're not really safe. You know, what could happen is you could say you're here in the UK and you decide I'm going to go to southern India to some little conservative village and I'm going to marry some pious girl and bring her to London or whatever, and then you don't know, 2 weeks later the hijab's off. Like basically you don't know people's true state because of Netflix, because of social media, because of these things. Look what's happening in Saudi Arabia,
Hmm.
right? There's a massive rise of liberalism. So, and weirdly, Arsalan, this is the weirdest thing. In the most degenerate liberal societies, you find the most conservative Muslims. So, for example, some of the most conservative Muslims I've found is actually in Holland. It's actually in Germany. And Germany and Holland and these places are sometimes more liberal. And Netherlands, and Norway, right? Norway. It's really weird. It's like this weird situation where people are becoming more conservative in their little pockets in these areas. And I think what's happened is, society goes through these types of trends. So like the Victorians were very conservative. Before the Victorians, the Edwardians, they were quite, promiscuous. And then afterwards, what happened is Victorians became quite conservative. After the conservatives, then you had, the end of the Victorian era, liberalism. 1960s, you had the sexual revolution. People were more promiscuous in the 1960s than they are in 2024. 1960s and 70s was the sexual revolution. It was the most degenerate behavior you can imagine, right? Open relationships were like, what happened? 1980s, society became more and more and more and more religious. And I think what happened is, in my lifetime, I saw the pendulum swing because about 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, um, it was all about feminism and liberalism and atheism and secularism and, all these ideologies. And now people are like turning towards red pill and all this
Uh-huh.
other stuff. This is completely swinging. So I think the it's not static, and it's probably going to swing, in a few years' time again.
Might come back as well. It might come back as well since they don't even have a strong ground. So uh, philosophies like red pill, um, they they're not certain. They don't have a very strong basis. Like fundamentally, they're man-made philosophies. They have their own individual flaws as well.
Yeah,
And to be quite frank, red pill is very quite misogynistic, even from an Islamic paradigm. The way it views
mm,
women is it's not right as well.
mm,
But it's a very extreme response to the extreme response given to them by the liberal feminists as well. And we might see a paradigm shift within 10 to 15 years, like you've seen
yeah,
10 years before as well.
yeah. Academics actually um, refer to the conservative Muslims, right? People like Muhammad Hijab and Ali Dawa and these types of people. They've actually categorized them as green pill because they realize they can't be red pill because red pill is fundamentally hedonism. It's
Mm.
fundamentally it's a it's a for lack of a better term, it's a bastard child of liberalism, right? It's an illegitimate child of liberalism. Okay,
Hmm.
so it's there now. Another illegitimate child is feminism. So they're just, stepchildren. Like, they both have, if you like, the same father. But Islam doesn't accept that. And what was sad a few years ago is Muslims were pushing red pill, and I think that's very dangerous
Hmm.
because feminism was always seen as an enemy of Islam, even though some Muslims tried to feminize Islam. But red pill was getting in through the back door. It was the Trojan horse, right? And red pill fuels feminism as well. Somebody wrote this as a comment, and I agree with this. But like you said, Islam has its own paradigm. Islam has a totally distinct way of thinking.
Yeah. Just one thing I'd like to add is that, when the red pill was being pushed a couple of years ago, and before, coming to Islam, Andrew Tate, this he was the most prominent figure in pushing the red pill, if I'm not wrong. Now you'll have very less prominent figures that are pushing it, but um, the way he pushed it, it was actually very. The first thing was quite un-Islamic. The second thing is that from a secular perspective, he isn't wrong from a secular perspective,
Yes, yes,
because
yes.
what he's trying to say is that uh, the feminists or the liberal women have took advantage of men, and men need to take the wheel, and they need to be on guard. They pretty
Yeah,
much, he said something like that, and without getting the government involved, obviously. And it pretty much worked for some time, and
yeah,
that's why you have a lot of liberal feminists hating the red pill movement, and people inside the red pill movement, and calling them incels and all of that and stuff. So that is one perspective of what's was actually happening.
yeah, yeah. And also, I think they will find it hard to refute each other. So feminists and red pillars, because they both fundamentally are coming from the same paradigm of hedonism and liberalism, they've just constructed different structures with the same clay, if you like.
Hmm.
When it comes to something like Islam, we can go for the foundations of both of these ideologies, right?
Yeah, they don't have a very strong solid foundation. They don't even have a foundation at all.
Yeah,
So
I find that um, there is a there is a bait that people take when they go down these ideologies, and that bait itself is sometimes a legitimate grievance. It's actually legitimate. So, for example, um, women should be paid the same as men for the same work that they do.
hmm,
That's totally legitimate.
hmm,
Women should not be forced to marry somebody that they don't want to marry. Legitimate. Famous thing in Pakistan, women don't get inheritance, right? The men take all the inheritance,
hmm.
and the men actually um, reject their social responsibility in many cases towards women, right?
Yes.
Out of family honor and all this other nonsense, cultural misogynistic type things in terms of restrictions which don't come from Islam. So there's a lot of this stuff, and then the feminists use that, and they then blame those things on Islam rather than culture or other things.
Hmm.
And then the red pillars, and there is a very strong red pill movement in the Muslim world as well. They would be saying, well, look at these women, and you take care of them, and they do this and they do that, and if you don't do this, and like, again, trying to use some legitimate things, like in the West, women taking away children from their
Fathers.
husbands, fathers. That's a big reason why people go towards this. They used to call it feminism, right? Feminism, right, is the exact opposite of feminism. So Islam is that middle beautiful way which challenges both of these. So we've come to close to an hour. It's really nice speaking to you, and I wanted to get your perspective from being inside the universities of Pakistan. What do you think is the need of the hour for Muslim students of your age group? Like, what is the need of the hour? What is the calling of the hour?
So, uh, at least in Pakistan at the moment, I'd say there are a lot of skillful people. They'll be very good engineers. They'll be very good people that'll excel in fields of medicine and stuff like that. But one of the things I'd say that they lack is a solid foundation of tawheed and lack good company. I'd probably say these are the two predominantly things that students or people my age lack. And if these two things are fulfilled, uh, the shift we are currently seeing, we might see it much more faster.
Hmm.
Uh,
I think. Sorry.
yeah, that's it. So the
Yeah,
shift we're facing,
absolutely.
these are predominantly the two things I'd say, which I've personally observed.
Yeah, no, I totally concur with that. That is a huge thing. So, Arsalan, it was really nice speaking to you. Inshallah, we're going to be speaking again in the future.
Thank you.
Jazakallah khair.
Assalamualaikum. Oh yeah.
Assalamu alaikum wa